The Defiant scrap looked like a flying junkyard. Its hull was a patchwork of different metals welded together with thick, ugly seams that crossed the ship like scars. Some panels were bright silver, others were dark gray, and a few spots showed the dull orange of rust that Captain Elena Vasquez never bothered to paint over. The ship's engines were loud and smoky, and they left a trail of sparks behind them as the vessel slowly approached Nexus Station. Elena watched through the cracked front window as other ships glided past them. The Zephyrian vessels looked like they were made of pure crystal, their surfaces smooth and perfect. They moved without any visible engines, phasing in and out of space like ghosts. The Kithrin ships were alive, their biometal hulls breathing and shifting as they flew. The Valorian fleet was the worst of all. Their ships were made of pure energy, glowing white and gold, looking like small suns as they moved through space. And then there was her ship. The Defiant scrap coughed and wheezed as it flew, leaving a trail of metal particles and engine oil. Elena could hear the other crews laughing over the radio. "Look at that human rust bucket," said a Zephyrian pilot, his voice clear over the communications channel. "How does that thing even stay together?" "Probably held together with tape and hope," replied a Valorian commander. "These humans are so primitive. They still use actual metal for their ships." Elena turned off the radio and looked back at her crew. There was Marcus, her engineer, who used to fix military ships before the war ended. His hands were always dirty with grease, and he knew every bolt and wire on the ship. Sarah sat at the navigation console, her fingers dancing over the old analog controls. She had learned to fly by dodging asteroids in the outer systems where no sane pilot would go. And there was Tommy, barely 20 years old, who could find valuable salvage in the most broken pieces of space junk. "They're talking about us again," Marcus said, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. "Let them talk," Elena replied. "We've been hearing it for years." The Defiant scrap had been in Elena's family for 3 generations. Her grandfather built it from the wreckage of a cargo ship and an old mining vessel. Her father added the extra engines and the reinforced hull. Elena had added the weapon systems and the better life support. Each generation had made the ship stronger, but also uglier. As they approached the docking bay, Elena could see the alien crews gathering to watch. This always happened when a human ship arrived at Nexus Station. The aliens treated it like entertainment, pointing and laughing at the humans and their primitive technology. The docking bay was huge, big enough to hold 100 ships. The alien vessels floated into their spots with perfect grace, their advanced systems guiding them automatically. The Defiant scrap came in loud and rough, its engines firing in short bursts as Sarah fought to control the ship's movement. "Careful with the left engine," Marcus called out. "It's been acting up since we left Mars." "I know what I'm doing," Sarah replied, but Elena could see the sweat on her forehead. Docking was always the hardest part for human ships. Their systems were manual, requiring skill and luck in equal measure. The ship touched down with a heavy thud that shook the entire vessel. A few panels rattled loose from the ceiling, and Tommy caught them before they could hit anyone. The aliens in the nearby ships were laughing openly now, some of them taking pictures of the human ship. Elena stood up and straightened her worn jacket. "Let's get this over with," she said. The airlock opened with a loud hiss, and Elena stepped out onto the docking platform. The aliens were already waiting for her. There was Zektar, a tall Zephyrian with skin like polished silver. His ship was docked nearby, looking like a work of art compared to the Defiant scrap. Next to him stood Commander Veloth, a Valorian whose body glowed with soft golden light. His energy ship was almost too bright to look at directly. "Captain Vasquez," Zektar said, his voice smooth and cold. "I see your ship made it here in one piece. I'm surprised." "It always does," Elena replied. "For now," Commander Veloth added. "But how much longer can you keep that flying wreck operational? Perhaps it's time you considered upgrading to proper technology." Elena looked at her ship. It was ugly, she had to admit. The hull was dented and scarred from years of hard use. The engines were old and loud, the weapons looked like they belonged in a museum. But it was hers and it worked. This ship has been flying for 70 years, she said. How old is yours, Commander? 3 years, Veloth replied proudly. But it's built with the finest energy-weaving technology in the galaxy. It will last for centuries, if you say so. A crowd of aliens had gathered to watch the conversation. There were Kithrans with their shifting biometal skin, Zephyrians with their perfect crystal bodies, and Valorians glowing with inner light. They all looked at Elena and her crew like they were looking at children playing with toys. The Federation Council has been discussing the human problem, Zektar said. Your ships are becoming a navigation hazard. The amount of debris they leave behind is affecting traffic patterns. And the insurance costs, added a Kithran trader. Every time a human ship docks, we have to increase our coverage. Your vessels are so unstable. Elena felt her anger rising, but she kept her voice calm. Our ships meet all safety requirements. Barely, Velos said, and that's the problem. You humans cling to this primitive technology like it's something to be proud of. Metal ships, chemical engines, analog controls, it's all so ancient. The galaxy is moving forward, but you're stuck in the past. We prefer to call it reliable, Marcus said, stepping up beside Elena. The aliens laughed. Reliable? Zektar said. Your ship is held together with welding patches and prayer. That's not reliability, that's desperation. At least our ships don't phase out of existence when the power fails, Sarah said. Zephyrian technology doesn't fail, Zektar replied coldly. Everything fails eventually, Elena said. The difference is, when our ships break, we can fix them. Can you say the same? Commander Veloth stepped forward, his golden glow brightening. You humans are a temporary species, he said. Your metal coffins are proof of your inevitable extinction. The galaxy belongs to those who embrace progress, not those who worship rust and decay. The crowd of aliens murmured their agreement. Elena looked around at their perfect ships, their flawless technology, their confident faces. They really believed what they were saying. They thought humans were primitive, backward, doomed to failure. Maybe you're right, Elena said finally. Maybe we are primitive. Maybe our ships are ugly and old and held together with tape and hope. But you know what? They're ours. We built them with our own hands, and we fix them when they break. Every dent and scratch tells a story. Every patch and weld represents a problem we solved. She turned to look at the defiant scrap, sitting in its docking bay like a metal beast at rest. You can mock our rust all you want. But remember this, we didn't get those scars by running away from fights. We got them by surviving things that would have destroyed your pretty ships. The aliens were silent for a moment. Then Commander Veloth laughed. Brave words from someone flying an antique. But bravery won't save you when your engines fail in deep space or when your hull breaches because it's too old to hold pressure. We'll see, Elena said. She turned and walked back toward her ship, her crew following behind her. As they reached the airlock, she could hear the aliens starting to laugh again, making jokes about human stubbornness and primitive pride. Elena paused at the entrance to her ship and looked back one more time. The alien vessels gleamed in the station's lights, beautiful and perfect and cold. They looked like they had been built by machines for machines. There was no character in them, no history, no soul. The defiant scrap was different. It was ugly and loud and rough around the edges, but it was alive in a way that the alien ships could never be. It had personality. It had survived things that would have killed lesser vessels. It had carried Elena's family through 3 generations of space travel, and it would keep flying long after those perfect alien ships had been forgotten. Let them laugh, she said to her crew as they entered the ship. They think our rust makes US weak. Someday they'll learn the truth. What truth? Tommy asked. Elena smiled as she looked around at the worn metal walls, the patched cables, the jury-rigged systems that kept them alive in the cold darkness of space. That rust isn't weakness. It's proof that we've been tested by fire and survived. The first warning came from a deep space probe near the galactic rim. The automated signal was brief and broken, cutting off in the middle of a sentence. The Federation Council dismissed it as equipment failure. After all, the Rim territories were known for their unreliable technology and poor maintenance. 3 days later, an entire mining colony went silent. Captain Elena Vasquez was loading supplies onto the Defiant scrap when the emergency broadcast reached Nexus Station. Her crew stopped working to listen as Admiral Korthek, the Valorian fleet commander, addressed the station. "Citizens of the Federation," his voice rang out across the docking bays. "We have received disturbing reports from the Outer Rim. Several colonies have lost contact with Central Command. Our investigation teams are being dispatched immediately." Elena exchanged glances with Marcus. They had both served in the Rim territories during their younger days. They knew how dangerous those regions could be, but entire colonies didn't just disappear. "Probably raiders," Sarah said, tying down a crate of spare parts. "The Rim has always been wild territory." "Maybe," Elena replied, but something in the Admiral's voice worried her. Valorians were known for their confidence, their absolute belief in their own superiority. Admiral Korthek sounded nervous. Over the next week, more colonies went dark. The pattern was always the same: normal communications, then silence. No distress signals, no calls for help, just empty space where thriving settlements used to be. The Federation's response was swift and overwhelming. Commander Veloth led a massive fleet toward the Rim, their energy ships glowing like a constellation as they departed Nexus Station. The fleet included the best the galaxy had to offer: 50 Valorian energy vessels, 30 Zephyrian phase ships, and 20 of the newest Kithrin bio-cruisers. "The Rim territories will be secured within the week," Veloth announced before departure. "Whatever primitive threat has emerged from the void will be crushed by superior technology and tactics." Elena watched the fleet leave from her ship's observation deck. The alien vessels moved in perfect formation, their advanced systems keeping them in precise alignment. It was an impressive sight, and she had to admit that part of her was jealous. The human fleet had never looked so organized or powerful. 2 weeks passed with no word from the expedition. The Federation Council tried to maintain calm, but Elena could see the worry in their faces during the daily broadcasts. 3 weeks. 4 weeks. Then, 5 weeks after the fleet had departed, a single ship limped back to Nexus Station. It was a Zephyrian phase ship, but something was horribly wrong with it. Instead of its usual crystal clarity, the hull was dark and twisted. Strange growths covered its surface, pulsing with an alien rhythm. The ship's phase drive was failing, causing it to flicker in and out of reality as it approached the docking bay. Elena joined the crowd of beings that gathered to watch the ship's arrival. The vessel touched down with a sickening crunch, its corrupted hull cracking under its own weight. The airlock opened and a single Zephyrian stumbled out. Elena had never seen Zektar look so broken. His usually perfect silver skin was cracked and dull. His clothes were torn, and his eyes held a terror that went deeper than fear. He collapsed as soon as he reached the platform, and medical teams rushed to help him when he could finally speak. His words chilled everyone who heard them. "They came from the void," he whispered. "Ships that weren't ships. Living things that ate our technology and made it part of themselves. We tried to fight them, but every weapon we used against them, they learned. Every tactic we employed, they copied and improved." Admiral Korthek leaned forward. "What happened to the fleet?" "Where is Commander Veloth?" Zektar's voice broke. "Consumed. Absorbed, turned into part of them. The bioships were the first to fall. The swarm took them and made them into something else, something hungry and wrong. Then they came for the energy vessels. Our perfect technology became their food." "That's impossible," Korthek said. "Valorian energy weaving cannot be corrupted. Tell that to Veloth," Zektar replied. "I watched him scream as his ship was drained and absorbed. I watched his energy form flicker and die as the swarm fed on. Everything that made him powerful." The crowd fell silent. Elena felt a cold fear spreading through her chest. She had heard stories about things that lived in the deep void, ancient horrors that predated the galaxy's civilized species. Most people dismissed them as myths, but looking at Zektar's broken form, she was starting to believe. "How did you?" Escape? Someone asked. My ship's phase drive malfunctioned during the battle, Zektar said. Instead of taking me to safety, it threw me randomly through space. By pure chance, I ended up behind them, watching as they finished consuming the fleet. I saw what they did to our ships, our crews, our technology. They don't just destroy, they convert. They take everything we are and make it part of themselves. Admiral. Korthik stood straighter, his golden glow brightening with determination. Then we'll build a bigger fleet. Bring more ships, better weapons. Whatever these creatures are, they can be defeated. Zektar laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You don't understand. They adapt. Every weapon we fired at them, they absorbed and learned to use against us. The bioship's healing abilities became their regeneration. The phase ship's dimensional travel became their hunting technique. The energy vessel's power became their fuel. So what are you saying? Korthik demanded. I'm saying we're fighting an enemy that becomes stronger every time we attack it. Each battle teaches them more about us, makes them more powerful. They're not just destroying the rim territories, they're learning how to destroy the entire galaxy. Elena felt her hands trembling. The Federation's most advanced technology had been turned against them. The galaxy's greatest weapons had become tools of their enemy. If what Zektar said was true, then conventional warfare was worse. Then useless, it was actively helping the enemy. Over the following days, more survivors trickled back to Nexus Station. Each one told the same story. The swarm was unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They were biomechanical creatures that could take any technology and make it part of themselves. They learned and adapted at an impossible rate, turning each species' greatest strengths into their own weapons. A Kithran survivor described watching his bioship's living hull being corrupted and turned against its own crew. A Valorian told of seeing her energy weapons being absorbed and reflected back with twice the power. Every account was the same: total defeat, total absorption, total horror. The Federation Council met in emergency session. Elena watched the broadcasts as the galaxy's leaders struggled to understand what they were facing. Some called for evacuation of the core worlds. Others demanded the construction of new superweapons. A few suggested surrender and negotiation, but Elena could see the truth in their faces. They were terrified. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had thrown their best technology at the swarm, and it had only made things worse. Every weapon they used was turned against them. Every advantage they possessed became another tool for their enemies. The debates continued for days, but no solutions emerged. How do you fight an enemy that becomes stronger every time you attack it? How do you defeat creatures that can absorb and improve upon your most advanced technology? As Elena walked through Nexus Station, she could see the panic spreading. Alien traders were packing up their goods and fleeing toward the galactic core. Military ships were being recalled from Frontier. Duties to protect the inner worlds. The confident, superior aliens who had mocked human technology just weeks before now looked lost and afraid. That night, Elena sat in her ship's common room with her crew. The Defiant scrap felt different now, more like a home and less like a burden. Outside, the station buzzed with activity as beings prepared for war or evacuation. So what do we do? Tommy asked. He was young, barely out of his teens, and the fear in his voice made Elena's heart ache. We wait, she replied. And we hope someone smarter than us can figure out how to stop these things. But even as she said it, Elena doubted that anyone could find a solution. The swarm had defeated the galaxy's finest technology with ease. They had turned the Federation's greatest strengths into weaknesses. They were coming, and conventional warfare had proven to be exactly what they wanted. Marcus was cleaning his tools, his hands moving automatically through the familiar routine. You know what's funny? He said. All these years, they've been telling us our ships are primitive. Too simple, too crude, too unreliable. What's your point? Sarah asked. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Marcus replied. These swarm creatures, they absorb advanced technology. They learn from it and make it their own. But what if there's nothing to learn? What if the technology is so simple that there's no advantage to be gained? Elena looked at him with new interest. Keep talking. Think about it, Marcus continued. The swarm fed on phase drives and energy weaving and biotechnology because those systems gave them new abilities. But what could they learn from a chemical rocket? What advantage would they gain from absorbing a metal hull held together with bolts and welds? You're talking about fighting aliens with sticks and stones, Sarah said. Maybe that's exactly what we need, Elena replied slowly. An idea. The emergency meeting was held in the largest conference room on Nexus Station. Elena had never been inside before. Humans were rarely invited to Federation Council gatherings. The room was designed to impress, with walls that showed real-time images of space and seating arranged in perfect circles based on species hierarchy. Humans, when they were included at all, usually sat in the back. Today was different. Elena found herself seated at the main table, along with a dozen other human captains who had been hastily summoned from across the sector. Around them sat the remnants of the Federation's leadership, Admiral Korthak and his surviving Valorian commanders, several Zephyrian fleet captains, and the few Kithran bio-ship masters who had escaped the swarm's advance. The aliens looked broken. Their perfect composure was gone, replaced by barely controlled panic. Elena had never seen proud beings like these look so lost and desperate. Admiral Korthak stood at the center of the room, his golden glow dimmed to almost nothing. The situation is critical, he began. Long-range sensors show the swarm has consumed 17 more systems in the past week. At their current rate of advance, they will reach the core worlds within a month. A holographic display showed the galaxy with red markers indicating swarm-controlled territory. The crimson stain was spreading like an infection, consuming everything in its path. Our remaining fleets are being recalled to defend the inner systems, Korthak continued. But based on what we've learned from survivors, conventional warfare appears to be counterproductive. Every weapon we use against them makes them stronger. Captain Velanash, a Zephyrian who had lost half his fleet in a recent skirmish, spoke up. They consumed my phase ships like they were made of paper. Worse, they learned to phase themselves. Now they can appear anywhere without warning. The bio-ships were corrupted within minutes, added Commander Thele, a Kithran whose voice shook with remembered horror. Our living technology became their living technology. They turned our own ships against us. Elena listened to the reports with growing understanding. The swarm wasn't just destroying the Federation's technology, they were stealing it, improving it, and using it against its creators. Every advanced system became another weapon in their arsenal. Admiral Korthak's gaze fell on the human delegation. Which brings us to why you're here, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Our military strategists have analyzed every possible approach. New weapons will only be absorbed by the enemy. Defensive strategies have proven ineffective against an adaptive foe. We need alternative solutions. Elena could hear the reluctance in his voice. The proud Valorian admiral was asking for help from the species he had called temporary just weeks before. What kind of alternatives? Asked Captain Rodriguez, an older human who commanded a mining vessel. Primitive ones, Korthak replied. The word coming out like it hurt to say. Our analysis suggests that the swarm's adaptation abilities are focused on advanced technology. They may have difficulty processing simpler systems. Captain Velanash leaned forward. Are you seriously suggesting we fight with ancient weapons? I'm suggesting we explore all options, Korthak said firmly. The humans have experience with older technologies. Perhaps they can offer insights we've missed, Elena almost laughed. After years of being mocked for their rust buckets and primitive ships, the Federation was finally asking for human help. But the situation was too serious for petty satisfaction. We need to see the data first, she said. Everything you know about how these things work, how they adapt, what they can and can't absorb. For the next several hours, Elena and the other human captains studied the Federation's intelligence reports. The picture that emerged was terrifying but also revealing. The swarm could absorb almost any technology, but they seemed to focus on systems that offered clear advantages: energy manipulation, dimensional travel, biological integration, quantum computing. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a tactical analysis. He had been invited as Elena's technical advisor. Every time they encounter something new, they spend time analyzing it, breaking it down, understanding how it works. Then they improve on it and integrate it into their own forces. "That takes time," Sarah observed. "Even if it's just minutes or hours, there's still a delay between encountering new technology and adapting to it." Elena studied the reports more carefully. "They're like the ultimate scavengers," she said. "They take the best parts of everything. They encounter and add it to their collection." "But what if there were no best parts to take?" The alien commanders looked confused, but Elena could see understanding dawning on the other human faces. "You're talking about technology that's so simple it offers no advantages," Captain Rodriguez said slowly. "Exactly," Elena replied. "Chemical. Rockets, metal projectiles, analog controls, kinetic weapons. Things that do exactly what they're supposed to do and nothing more." Admiral Korthek's golden form flickered with agitation. "You want us to fight an advanced alien threat with primitive weapons?" "I want us to fight them with weapons they can't improve," Elena corrected. "Look at your own reports. The swarm absorbs energy weapons and makes them more powerful. They take bioships and make them more adaptive. They steal phase drives and become better at dimensional travel. But what could they learn from a simple metal slug fired by chemical propulsion?" "How to make metal slugs," suggested Captain Velenash sarcastically. "They already know how to make metal," Marcus said. "The advantage isn't in the projectile, it's in the simplicity. No energy signature to absorb, no exotic matter to analyze, no quantum fields to reverse engineer. Just physics, mass times velocity equals impact." Elena stood and moved to the holographic display. "Every weapon in your arsenal is a masterpiece of engineering. Phase cannons that bend space-time, bioweapons that adapt to their targets, energy. Beams that can cut through any material. The swarm loves that stuff because it gives them new abilities." She gestured to the spreading red stain on the galactic map. "But our weapons aren't masterpieces. They're tools. Crude, simple, reliable tools that do one job and do it well. There's nothing for the swarm to learn because there's nothing advanced about them." Commander Thylak spoke up, his biomechanical voice skeptical. "Even if that theory is correct, primitive weapons lack the power to damage swarm vessels. Our most advanced armaments barely scratch them." "Because you were trying to out-tech them," Elena replied. "But kinetic weapons don't need to be high-tech to be effective. A piece of metal moving fast enough will punch through any hull, no matter how advanced." "The humans have a point," said Captain Rodriguez. "Our railguns aren't fancy, but they can accelerate a projectile to significant fractions of light speed. That's not technology, that's just physics." Elena could see the aliens struggling with the concept. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that newer and more advanced was always better. The thought of deliberately using inferior technology went against everything they believed. "This is insane," Captain Velenash said. "You're asking us to abandon millions of years of technological development and fight like barbarians. We're asking you to fight smart instead of fighting fancy." Elena replied, "The swarm has turned your greatest strengths into weaknesses. Your perfect technology is feeding them. Maybe it's time to try imperfect technology that they can't digest." Admiral Korthak was quiet for a long moment, his golden glow pulsing as he considered the proposal. Finally he spoke. "What would this ... primitive approach look like in practice?" Elena smiled grimly. "Kinetic weapons. Lots of them. Railguns, mass drivers, good old-fashioned missiles with chemical explosives. Analog guidance systems that can't be hacked or corrupted. Armor made of simple steel and ceramic instead of exotic composites." "And ships?" Korthak asked. "Ships built to take damage and keep fighting," Marcus answered. "No fancy self-repair systems for the swarm to corrupt. No energy shields for them to absorb. Just thick armor, redundant systems, and enough firepower to level a city. You're describing human ships, Commander Thylik observed. Now you're getting it, Elena said. For years, you've told us our ships were obsolete, primitive, held together with prayer and stubbornness. Maybe that's exactly what we need right now. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Federation's most advanced civilizations would have to abandon their technological superiority and fight like their ancestors did, with simple weapons and crude tactics. The logistics alone would be nightmarish, Admiral Korthik said finally. Retooling our factories, retraining our crews, adapting our strategies, it would take months we don't have. Not if you use human shipyards, Elena replied. We've been building these kinds of ships for generations. Our factories are already set up for mass production of primitive technology. We can have a fleet ready in weeks, not months. A fleet of rust buckets, Captain Velenash said dismissively. A fleet of ships the swarm can't absorb, Elena corrected. Ships that will still be fighting even when everything else has been consumed. Admiral. Korthik's glow brightened slightly. Elena could see him beginning to believe, beginning to hope that maybe there was a way to fight back after all. Even if this works, he said slowly, it means abandoning everything that makes us civilized. Our technology. The human shipyards around Earth had never been so busy. For 3 weeks, factories that usually built cargo haulers and mining ships worked around the clock to produce warships. But these weren't the sleek, beautiful vessels that other species created. These were ugly, brutal machines designed for one purpose: to kill things that couldn't be killed by normal weapons. Elena stood on the bridge of the Iron Spite, watching as the last of the primitive fleet took shape outside the shipyard. The ship had been her grandfather's design, scaled up and loaded with every simple weapon they could mount on it. Instead of elegant energy weapons, it bristled with railguns, missile pods, and kinetic cannons. The hull was thick steel plating, over a framework that could take massive damage and keep fighting. It's not pretty, Marcus said, joining her at the observation window. It's not supposed to be pretty, Elena replied. It's supposed to work. The fleet that was assembling looked like something from a museum. 200 ships of various sizes, all built from the same philosophy, simple, tough, and completely analog. No computers that could be hacked, no energy systems that could be absorbed, no exotic materials that the swarm could learn from. Each ship was commanded by humans, but the crews were mixed. Alien volunteers had come forward after the first test. Battles showed that primitive weapons could actually hurt the swarm. Elena had been surprised by how many proud Valorians and Zephyrians were willing to serve on ugly human ships if it meant they could fight back. Captain Velenash worked at the weapons station behind her. The Zephyrian had volunteered for Elena's crew after his own ship was consumed. He still complained about the crude controls and manual targeting systems, but he had learned to use them effectively. Incoming transmission from Admiral Korthik, Sarah announced from the communications station. The main screen flickered to life, showing the Valorian admiral on the bridge of his own primitive warship. The Golden Hammer was a modified human design, with Valorian improvements, though the improvements were things like better armor and more guns rather than advanced technology. Fleet commanders, the swarm has been detected approaching the Kepler Nebula, Korthik announced. Long-range sensors show approximately 500 vessels. They're moving in formation toward Nexus Station. Elena felt her stomach tighten. This was it. The first real test of their primitive fleet against the enemy that had consumed everything the galaxy could throw at it. All ships begin final weapon checks, Korthik continued. Remember, we're not trying to out-tech them. We're trying to outfight them. Use simple tactics, simple weapons, and simple thinking. The moment we get clever, we give them something to learn from. The transmission ended, and Elena turned to her crew. You heard the Admiral. Final checks on all systems. I want every gun loaded, every missile armed, and every backup system ready. The next few hours passed slowly as the fleet moved into position near the nebula's edge. Elena had chosen this location carefully. The dense gas and dust would interfere with the swarm's more advanced sensors, while barely affecting human analog systems. "Contact," Sarah announced suddenly. Multiple vessels emerging from hyperspace at Grid 77 Alpha. On the main screen, Elena could see them coming. The swarm ships were horrible to look at, like someone had taken normal vessels and infected them with a disease. What had once been Valorian energy ships now pulsed with stolen light, their hulls covered in organic growths. Former Zephyrian phase ships flickered in and out of reality, but wrong somehow, as if they existed in too many dimensions at once. And leading them all was something that had once been Commander Veloth flagship. The Eternal Glory was now a twisted nightmare of corrupted energy and biomechanical parts. Elena could see traces of its original beauty beneath the swarm's modifications, like bones showing through rotting flesh. "All ships, this is Admiral Korthek," the communication system crackled. "Weapons free. Remember, simple, brutal, effective. No fancy maneuvers, no complex tactics. Just put kinetic rounds where they'll do the most damage." The battle began with a massive railgun volley from the primitive fleet. 200 ships opened fire simultaneously, sending thousands of metal slugs racing through space at incredible speed. There were no energy beams to be absorbed, no exotic particles to be analyzed. Just chunks of steel and tungsten, moving fast enough to punch through any armor. The swarm's response was immediate and terrible. The corrupted ships returned fire with weapons stolen from a dozen different species. Energy beams, biomissiles, phase torpedoes, and things that Elena couldn't even identify, streaked toward the human fleet, but the primitive ships had been built to take punishment. When energy beams hit their thick armor, they burned and scarred but didn't penetrate. When biomissiles tried to corrupt their systems, they found only simple metal and analog circuits. The exotic weapons that had devastated the Federation's finest fleets barely dented the crude human vessels. "Direct hit on Target 7, Marcus reported from his gunnery station. "Railgun penetration confirmed. They're venting atmosphere." Elena watched as one of the corrupted Zephyrian ships spun out of control, a neat hole punched through its center by a simple kinetic round. The swarm's biomechanical repairs tried to seal the breach, but there was nothing to learn from the attack, no technology to adapt to. It was just physics, mass times velocity equals holes in things. "They're trying to adapt to our weapons," Velanash observed, studying his sensor readings. "But there's nothing to adapt to. A metal slug is a metal slug." The swarm seemed confused by this development. Their ships moved in erratic patterns, trying different defensive strategies. Some tried to phase out of reality when railgun rounds approached, but the projectiles were too simple to be affected by dimensional manipulation. Others attempted to absorb the kinetic energy, but found they could only learn how to throw rocks, which they already knew. "All ships, advance and engage at close range," Admiral Korthek ordered. "Don't give them time to think of something clever." The primitive fleet moved forward in a loose formation, their engines leaving trails of chemical exhaust and metal particles. It wasn't elegant, but it was effective. The swarm's adaptive abilities worked best when they had time to analyze and understand new threats. Simple weapons fired at close range gave them no such luxury. Elena's ship shuddered as enemy fire struck the hull. Warning lights flashed as damaged systems automatically switched to backups. But the Iron Spite kept fighting, its simple redundancy keeping it operational even with significant damage. "Port railgun battery is down," Marcus reported. "Switching to starboard guns. Missile tubes are loaded and ready," added Tommy from the weapons control station. "Fire everything," Elena ordered. The ship bucked as dozens of missiles launched simultaneously. These weren't smart weapons with sophisticated guidance systems. They were simple chemical rockets with analog targeting. But they carried massive warheads filled with conventional explosives. And when they hit hard. The corrupted flagship that had once been Veleth's ship took the full barrage. Explosions rippled across its twisted hull as kinetic rounds, and missiles found their mark. The swarm's biomechanical repairs tried to cope with the damage, but conventional explosives left nothing to learn from except how to blow things up more efficiently. The flagship is breaking apart. Velanash reported with satisfaction that Elena watched as the nightmare that had once been the eternal glory split in half. Its stolen systems failing as simple destruction overwhelmed its adaptive capabilities. She felt a grim satisfaction seeing the corrupted vessel die, but the battle was far from over. The swarm was learning, but not in the way they usually did. Instead of adapting to new technology, they were trying to adapt to the lack of technology. Some ships began using their corrupted bioweapons as simple kinetic projectiles. Others tried to ram the human vessels with their reinforced hulls. "They're getting desperate," Sarah observed as a corrupted Kithran ship attempted to ram the iron spite. The human ship's thick armor absorbed the impact, while return fire from the main rail gun battery tore the attacker apart, but the primitive fleet was taking losses too. The stubborn mule exploded when its ammunition storage was hit. The rusty nail lost its engines and drifted helplessly until a friendly ship could tow it to safety. The broken hammer took so much damage that its crew had to abandon ship. Elena realized that this wasn't going to be a clean victory. The swarm might not be able to adapt to primitive weapons, but they were still dangerous. Their ships were fast. Their attacks were coordinated, and they fought with the desperate fury of beings who had never faced effective resistance before. "All ships, this is Admiral Korthik," the communication system announced. "The enemy is falling back." "Repeat, the swarm is retreating." Elena looked at her tactical display in amazement. It was true. The surviving swarm vessels were withdrawing, their formation breaking apart as they fled toward the galactic rim. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered an enemy they couldn't defeat by absorbing and improving their weapons. "Damage report," Elena ordered. "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, Marcus replied. "Port rail gun battery is completely destroyed. Starboard missiles are down to 20%, but the ship is operational and ready for combat." 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Nebula, the galaxy was a different place. Nexus Station had been transformed from a trading hub into a military fortress. Its docking bays filled with ships that would have been laughed at a year ago. The sleek, beautiful vessels of the Federation fleet now sat alongside crude human warships, their hulls deliberately scarred and patched to make them less appealing targets for swarm absorption. Elena walked through the station's main corridor, past groups of mixed crews preparing for another campaign. A Valorian engineer worked alongside a human mechanic, both of them covered in grease as they repaired a railgun mounting. A Zephyrian pilot studied analog navigation charts with a veteran human captain, learning how to fly without computer assistance. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many aliens had struggled to adapt to primitive technology and manual systems. Some had given up and fled to the inner core worlds. But those who stayed had learned something valuable, that sometimes the best solution was the simplest one. "Admiral Vasquez," a voice called out behind her. Elena turned to see Captain Velanash approaching. The proud Zephyrian looked different now. His crystal skin was marked with scars from battle, and he wore a patched human flight suit instead of his elegant formal uniform. But his eyes held something they hadn't before: respect. "Captain," Elena replied. She still wasn't comfortable with the promotion, but Admiral Korthak had insisted. The human who had saved the galaxy deserved an appropriate rank. "The new recruits are ready for inspection," Velanash reported. 300 alien volunteers, all trained on primitive weapons and analog systems. Elena nodded. The volunteer program had been one of their most successful initiatives. Young aliens from across the Federation were joining the primitive fleet, abandoning their species' advanced technology to fight with human weapons and tactics. They called themselves the Rust Brigade, wearing the name that had once been an insult as a badge of honor. "Any word from the scout ships?" Elena asked. "Long-range patrols report swarm activity in the outer rim," Velanash replied. "They're building something big. Our analysts think it might be a new type of vessel designed specifically to counter kinetic weapons." Elena had been expecting this. The swarm might not be able to adapt to primitive technology, but they could certainly learn to defend against it. Thicker armor, faster ships, better tactics, they would find ways to reduce the effectiveness of human weapons. Then we'll have to stay ahead of them, she said. Schedule a fleet commanders meeting for tomorrow. It's time to plan our next move. The meeting was held in the same conference room where Elena had first proposed the primitive fleet concept. But the atmosphere was completely different now. Instead of desperate aliens begging for help, she was surrounded by confident officers who had learned to fight and win. Admiral Korthek looked healthier than he had in months. His golden glow was bright and steady, and his voice carried the authority of someone who had seen victory. Our intelligence indicates the swarm is massing for a major offensive, he began. They've been gathering ships from across the Rim territories, including vessels corrupted from our own lost fleets. How many ships are we talking about? Asked Captain Rodriguez, now commanding a squadron of heavy assault vessels. Conservative estimate is 2,000 vessels, Korthik replied. But these aren't the same ships we fought at Kepler. They've been modified with additional armor and new defensive systems. Elena studied the tactical displays showing swarm positions. They're learning to counter our advantages. Thicker hulls to resist kinetic impact, redundant systems to survive damage, improved speed to close range quickly. So what do we do? Asked Commander Thylak. The Kithran had become one of their most effective primitive ship captains, his biomechanical nature helping him interface with simple analog controls. We do what humans have always done, Elena replied. We adapt faster than our enemies. Over the next few weeks, the primitive fleet underwent another transformation. If the swarm wanted to play the armor game, humanity would show them what real armor looked like. Ships were fitted with additional plating, their hulls reinforced with overlapping layers of steel and ceramic. Weapons were upgraded from simple kinetic rounds to specialized penetrator rounds designed to punch through thick armor, but Elena's most important innovation was tactical. Instead of fighting the traditional space battles that the swarm expected, the primitive fleet would use guerrilla tactics, hit and run attacks, ambush, fighting from cover whenever possible. The swarm's adaptive abilities worked best in direct confrontation, so humanity would avoid direct confrontation. The new strategy was tested 3 weeks later when a swarm scouting force entered the Titan system. Instead of meeting them in open space, Elena's ships hid among the asteroid fields and gas giant rings, using the environment as both cover and weapon. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, Sarah reported from the sensor station. 12 swarm vessels moving in standard formation. Elena smiled grimly. The swarm had learned human tactics from their previous encounters, but they were still thinking like an advanced civilization. They expected organized formations and predictable movements. All ships, execute scrap protocol, Elena ordered. The primitive fleet scattered like debris, each ship taking position behind asteroids or within gas clouds. To the swarm sensors, they looked like space junk, which in a way, they were. The swarm ships moved confidently through the system, their enhanced armor gleaming as they searched for the human fleet. Their sensors swept the area, but analog ships running silent were almost impossible to detect among natural space debris. Target acquired, Marcus whispered from his gunnery station. Range 4,000 kilometers and closing. Wait for it. Elena replied. The lead swarm vessel passed within 200 meters of the hidden iron spite. At that range, even the thickest armor couldn't stop a railgun firing at full power. Fire! Elena ordered. The ship shuddered as every weapon fired simultaneously. The swarm vessel, caught completely off guard, took the full barrage along its flank. Its enhanced armor held for a moment, then cracked and shattered under the concentrated kinetic assault. All around the system, other primitive ships emerged from hiding to attack. The swarm found themselves surrounded by enemies they couldn't see coming, taking fire from weapons they couldn't counter. Their formation collapsed as each ship fought desperately for survival. They're trying to adapt to our tactics, Velenash observed as the surviving swarm vessels attempted to scatter and hide among the asteroids. Let them try, Elena replied. We've been fighting dirty for 3 generations. They're just getting started. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the swarm scouting force. More importantly, it proved that primitive tactics could evolve just as effectively as primitive technology. Word of the victory spread quickly through the Federation. The species that had once mocked human ships were now begging for human training. Alien shipyards began producing their own versions of primitive warships, though they could never quite match the crude effectiveness of human originals. But Elena knew the real victory wasn't military, it was cultural. The galaxy had learned that advancement wasn't always improvement, that complex wasn't always better than simple, and that sometimes the best way forward was to look backward. A year after the first swarm attack, Elena stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Defiance, watching the mixed fleet prepare for another mission. The ships looked like a junkyard in space, human vessels patched and scarred from battle, alien ships deliberately uglified with primitive modifications, and new construction that prioritized function over form. Captain Velanash joined her at the window. "Do you think we've won?" he asked. "We've survived," Elena replied. "The swarm is still out there, still dangerous, but they can't absorb us anymore. They can't turn our strength against us." "Because we don't rely on strength," Velanash sighed, understanding dawning in his voice. "We rely on stubbornness," Elena smiled. "Now you're getting it." On the bridge, Admiral Korthak was addressing the fleet. His words carried across space to hundreds of ships crewed by dozens of species, all united by a common understanding that the best technology was the technology that worked. "Fleet commanders, we have reports of swarm activity in the Centauri sector," Korthak announced. "They've learned to expect our primitive weapons, so we'll have to be more primitive. They've adapted to our simple tactics, so we'll have to be more simple. And if they think they understand human stubbornness, we'll show them they're wrong." Elena looked out at the fleet one more time. The ships were ugly, crude, held together with welds and wire and determination. They leaked oil and left trails of sparks. Their weapons were simple, their tactics were basic, and their crews argued constantly about the best way to fix things with whatever happened to be available. They were perfect. "All ships, this is Admiral Vasquez," Elena said into her communicator. "Remember what brought us this far. It wasn't our technology or our weapons or our brilliant strategies. It was our refusal to give up, our ability to make do with what we have, and our talent for turning disadvantages into advantages." She paused, looking out at the stars where the swarm waited. "They mocked our rust and called us primitive. They thought our ships were